What's up, traders? Anthony Crudele here, and welcome to this week's episode of Develop Your Edge. In today's show, I'll be speaking with Josh Shuler. Josh will share with us how he's developed his edge and his favorite edge using market profile. And in my final thoughts, we'll go to the charts, and I'll share with you one of my favorite trade setups. But before we get to the interview with Josh, it's a new year. Happy New Year, everyone, by the way. And with markets continuing to get busy, and they're probably going to stay busy, don't forget that CME Group has micro E-mini sized options for the S&P 500 and NASDAQ. To learn more about them, go to activetrader.cmegroup.com. Hang tight while we get Josh on the line. Josh, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, buddy, what's going on?
Nothing much. So before we were going to record today, I was talking about trade with profile with you, and you told me that you're the chief auction maven. I mean, where did this name come from?
You know, it's back from years ago. I was working, doing some media stuff, and for whatever reason, we were looking for words, and we found this word because we were like looking at like job titles, and we're like, what's a better title than like director? Or and we're like, no, we're going to make somebody a maven, which is really just a trusted expert in a particular field, is all that means. But it's
well, today we're going to talk about your edge, and we're going to talk about trading with profile, and
sure.
you know. This year, actually, I'm pretty stacked up with a lot of people that use market profile coming on the show. I get a ton of requests for people to say, Anthony, bring on more people to talk about profile because it's become such a popular tool that traders use.
Yeah, great.
And I've had really, to me, no offense to you or anybody who uses profile, but I had Dalton on the show, and to me, he's the one who really, I read his books, talked with him extensively about it. He's
the godfather.
The godfather. That's a great way to put it. So what was interesting is that when he was on the show, he said to me, he's like, you know what? The profile isn't my edge. It's just a tool I use, but it's not my edge. What about you as someone who uses the profile? What's your edge?
Yeah, I would agree that the profile itself is not an edge. Just like if you talk to Morad, you know, it's not like I'm not a profile trader. All we use the profile to do is to help us organize information in the auction.
Bingo.
And make some decisions around that. Now I take it to kind of a different level of informing my edge, in that I've spent a fair bit of time extracting what I call behavioral statistics that you can pull off of the profile.
Okay.
And the different day types, you know, so there's nomenclature for people who are like really into auction theory, there's nomenclature of day types and open types, and you can actually extract statistical normalized behavior off of those things to give you an edge, you know. And it's not like with any market statistic, it's not a fail-proof metric, but it's something to go, hey, do I have reasonable expectations about what's going to happen now, given what's happened so far, and can that help me inform my decisions?
Explain that in a little bit more detail. Give us an example of a statistic that you pull from the profile that helps give you an edge.
Yeah, so the one that I always, so you know, we get traders that come to us often who have been in the industry for some time, love the market, and are still feeling like, man, like there's something missing, and I'm trying to get my arm around that. And so the first thing that we do is we look at what we call the initial balance. So, you know, that's the range of the first hour of the day. And what's interesting is that and it doesn't matter what product at all, any equity product, any of the futures asset classes, but if you look at the first full hour of that product, and you go back, like say 1,000 trading sessions, so go 5 years of data, is that 97% of the time we're going to get outside of that first hour's range. That's a meaningful statistic. And then once I get outside of that range, I find that once I've exceeded it to one side, there's only about a 30% chance I'll exceed the other side of that range. And then so that then reduces the probability of one side being extreme. So that gives me a risk measurement. And then on top of that, once I've exceeded it, what's the percent probability that I'll exceed that range measured against itself, say 50% or 100%? And I find, like if I take the S&P, for example, so the S&P 68% of the time, once it's exceeded the initial balance to one side, like today, it only took out the IB high. It's only going to see the IB high. Well, then the probability that it'll go another 50% of that original initial balance is about 60% of all trading sessions. And then to go to, like to double that range, it's about 25%. And so like you can use that and say, okay, so where am I within that range to give me an idea of what's the normalized statistical probability of continuation that then I can lay on top of, okay, well, what kind of day am I looking at? Because if it's a trend day, that'll be one of those days that I'll exceed those expectations. If I've got some rotations, then I can say, hey, this might be a good place that I could fade this. I've reached some of these expected ranges, and now I've seen some rotation, so I know that there's some fight. Here's the place to play from the edges.
So if something happens like that you talked about with the initial balance, you go and look at statistics, and then because if the probability is greater that something will happen, you consider that one of your edge. So you go to the
Yep.
statistics. I
Yeah.
totally understand that. Talk to us about, do you have multiple setups? Is it one setup that you're trading? Discuss a little bit more on how you developed, I guess, your overall edge.
Yeah. Yeah. Multiple setups. I've developed a playbook over the years and expand it, and then also have contracted it as I found that there's one more uh, setups that I like trading better than others.
Yeah, I've done the
We
same
kind of
thing.
all do that.
Yeah,
It
we
happens.
do.
It happens.
It
Anybody
does.
who's been in the industry long, and that's actually been one of the great things about having a community of traders that I'm always developing, because they're always like, where is the next edge? And they're always pushing me to try to find that. So that keeps me evolving and looking at different stuff. Um, but the first place that I start is I do look at that initial balance every day, because the probability that exceeded, I can ask two simple questions of like, do I go with that or do I fade it? And it's just a really simple framework, and then I can cascade from outside of that. So I can say, well, if I'm going to fade that, so what's the order flow look like so far? How much of the expected range within the that we saw out of the options market has been covered? Have we done 80% of that range? Have we done 70% of that range? Have we done, like the Nasdaq has done 150% of that? So like those are inputs that all cascade out. Almost think of it like a flight plan. If you've ever been like done any pilot training, like there's so much stuff before you ever get off the ground, but it kind of starts with, here's an idea of where I want to go. And I really every day, I keep pointing people back toward, use that initial opening hour. Like if you're not consistent yet, like a great way that you can be consistent in process is wait for that hour to complete, see how the auction's behaving within that hour, what those ranges were, and then go from there to build out.
That's
So yeah, it's all around that.
That's interesting that you say that, because people that know my strategy a little bit know that I don't use profile at all, but I wait to see what the first hour does and how it closes above or below support or resistance is how I will
Mhm.
typically trade. It keeps me in one direction that I want to be in. As a day trader, it's always, for me as a scalper for many years, not as much anymore. I was trading both sides and just becoming too active. And what I really started to do to help myself be more patient was wait to see how the first hour trades. And a lot of that was from knowing how profile works and
Mhm.
saying to myself, you know what, I'm not going to use profile, but I'm going to wait that first hour. And it just created patience and then reaction. And I want to talk a little bit about, I think that, I guess, summarizing it for it. I mean, I understand statistics, you're using the profile. To me, you're
Yeah.
very much into the math. Am I wrong? Like
Yeah.
what the probabilities are is where you're going to be trading,
Yeah.
and you have that initial balance. Talk to us about, because I guess every day, like you say, there's going no 2 days are the same, but there's a
Right.
lot of things that are similar that you see and recognize. So is it that you're at the screens at that moment, you wait for the first hour, then whatever has happened, you have this playbook of, okay, well, this happened, and now that's my trade. Is that how that works?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Very exactly.
So walk everybody through, I guess, when you're there, you're just waiting. And then when that happens, let's go with, what's your favorite one? Which one has the highest probability, the greatest edge?
Yeah. So and here's another part of of my edge has been key, and I would say I'd credit Mike Bellafiore for this. Is just from reading his books around having the playbook is naming each of my trades. So I've been able to enhance each trade setup by naming it. So like when I go on my trade logs, I'm like, okay, that's an IB extension fade, or that's an IB go with, or that's a structure cleanup, or that's a posture trade. Like I know what those are, and I can vet them. So like one of my favorite trades is what I call an extension fade, and so that's where we've exceeded that initial balance, and we're now kind of out in the stratosphere outside of that opening range. And one of the stats that I look at is what's the average width of an initial balance over the like a rolling month. Okay, so like if I like to trade the Nasdaq is kind of one of my key intraday trading vehicles right now,
Me too.
and the Nasdaq averages about 90 points in the first hour right now. Okay, so then rolling 30-day base. So today we put in 161 points. So that tells me that we juiced a lot in that first hour, and if we get even further beyond that, that's a recipe for failure, and there's some edge there because people who are late to the move can get trapped, and that's a spot that I could put on a high
Ooh.
probability fade. So in that sense, I'm when I see that first hour, and one of the first things that I check is, well, how wide was that first hour relative to its average? If it's narrow, if it's 50% of what we expected, then I'm typically looking to go with that extension because if you think of it like water that I can pour in a jug, it's going to spill over. If we do super wide, then I get less interested in going with that extension, and I look more to fade that. And that's one of my favorite ones. Because you'll get somebody trapped who just thinks the thing's going to go to the moon, and then they buy late, and that's great. Like that's the place that I can go the other direction.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to ask you a final question before I let you go is
Yeah.
because you have this playbook of things that happen on a day-to-day basis. You're watching the first hour, you're waiting to see what happens, and then you have these setups with statistics that support them. Is there ever a time where nothing comes into play and the edge is actually waiting? And the reason I ask that is because
Yeah.
when you have multiple setups like that, to me,
Yeah.
it seems like almost every day that you would almost generate a trade. But what
Right.
is the edge in the moment to where there isn't one? Do you have that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the place that I keep trying to push both myself and the traders we work with more and more toward, like what's an A trade versus a C trade.
Yes. Okay.
Is if I'm grading that, is I'd say, okay, well, like on an extension fade. So the two criteria on that trade are: have I extended the initial balance, and is there divergence between the current price and the most traded price of the day? So if those are the first two criteria that have to exist for me to even look at that trade. But that's just the first two out of 10, right?
Got
So
it.
then that starts me, and then I'll say, okay, well, what's the order flow doing? How's the structure within that initial balance? Are there areas where we only traded that price for half hour? Where are we contextually? Not just this session, but multiple sessions. Um, those all factor into, okay, now let's place a trigger, all the way down to, can I find a short term trigger that I can define risk against that gives me a favorable risk to reward ratio that I'm willing to press the trade. But if all of those things don't meet, then there's no trade, and that's a win. That's a win in the book.
Yeah, I mean, traders, this is why I talk about this all the time. I mean, big, small, not at all. And for me, I always have what I call my money setup and my
Yeah,
favorite trade. And then I have the other setups where I'm like, I kind of like this one. And then there's one where it's small or not at all. And there, to me, that allows me in the moment to get more out of my strategy. That's a lot of times why I say I am my edge. I'm the best executor of my strategy. It's why I don't automate it, because there are certain things going on that you watch and you say, this is a big trade for me. I have to be full risk here. This one's not.
yeah,
Maybe it's smaller or not at all.
yeah,
Loved everything we talked about today. In a sentence or two, because we talked really about a lot of different things that are your edge. Tell
yeah.
everybody, just define it. What is your edge?
What is my edge? It is a defined playbook that's been honed, looking at using the profile to organize information, but married with behavioral statistics, which helped me get an understanding of like what's a reasonable expectation during a day. It's not a guarantee, but it's a reasonable expectation, and that's something that I can exploit. And so having all of that come together to be able to exploit it, that's my edge.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Josh was actually with us at the Traders Invitational. Hopefully that happens this year. We'll see what happens with COVID. So hopefully we get to see each other in person, play some golf, and hang out
Yeah, brother.
again. It's always great to speak with you, Josh. Big fan of all of your work. Thank you so much for joining me today on Develop Your Edge.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, brother.
Hang tight, traders. I'll be right back. My final thoughts.
24/7 access to diverse global markets. Right here.
That's why I added stock index futures to my trading strategy. Now when I see ups and downs coming, I'm ready.
Well played.
Why trade with TradeStation? It's innovative, easy to use, and totally freaking sweet. With powerful tools to track and execute your trades and low per trade commissions on stocks, futures, and options. Upgrade your trade at TradeStation.com.
Final thoughts for today, traders. It was great to hear Josh's perspective and how he trades using Market Profile. Over the past several months, I would say the most popular email that I get is to do more shows on Profile. Market Profile and Volume Profile have become really so much more popular than when I first originally started to trade. And more traders are using that, and they've been curious as to how traders have developed an edge using the profile. And I thought with Josh today, what I really liked about it is number one, it was very simple. He built a playbook of his favorite setups, and then he went to the statistics. And he actually shared with us one of his favorite edges, all came from statistics. So I think that it's very relatable and very simple for traders to follow in Josh's path to start developing their own edge using profile. And since Josh shared with us one of his favorite edges that he's currently trading, I figured I'd go to the charts and share with you guys one of my favorite trade setups. So let's go to the charts. I pulled up here on TradeStation an E-mini S&P 60-minute and a Russell 2000 60-minute. And one thing that I look at consistently is who is the leader to the upside when we're all going higher. And when I say we're all, any markets that are strongly correlated, S&P, Russell, NASDAQ, Dow, they're strongly correlated. I typically will look at all of them, and for this example today, I just have S&P and Russell. I will look at them and say, who is the leader to the upside? And I don't do that purely by percentage-wise and by who's making all-time highs, because we're not always making all-time highs. It sure feels that way, but we're not. What I like to look at is simply a 60-minute chart. You guys have heard me talk about this with my indicator, okay? And you know how I use Bollinger Bands. Remember, you could download my indicator for free at anthonycrudele.com. And if you want to know my entire process and how I do it, go back to Develop Your Edge, Show 1, and I explain my process. But for today's example, what I want to show you is, like I said, one of my favorite trade setups. So you can see the 60-minute lines in the S&P and the Russell here. And you can see that the Bollinger Bands right now are within my top and bottom support and resistance for the S&P. And for the Russell, you can see the top Bollinger Band is well above top resistance, and you could also see that the Russell is well above my top resistance level. So on this just straight comparison, and on the time frame I'm trading, which is a 60-minute, that's my favorite time frame as well, that the Russell is the outperformer. Okay. So what I'm looking for is this, and I think it's a mistake that a lot of traders make. This is why I pulled up the Russell versus the S&P today. A lot of people will look at all of the indices and say, well, the Russell's the strongest, and because the S&P is the S&P 500, really the granddaddy of all of the stock market, they look to say, maybe I should be shorting the Russell, so they look to sell resistance. I think in the exact opposite, especially when we're going up. I look to see who's the leader, and I solely focus in on all buy signals on the Russell. So any reversion back to the mean, I'm going to take every blue and orange I can on bigger full positions in the Russell versus the S&P. The S&P to me, because it's a little bit more choppy, maybe I would trade it two ways, or maybe I just wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't be scared to be taking shorts in the S&P because they are not outperforming. So I actually look at it and say the weaker one is the one, if I got confirmation on a short setup, I would take it, but I know it's a smaller trade for me and probably more of a two-way trade. Still a little bit more on the buy side because the overall trend is up, but my favorite trade, as I started off talking about, is let the Russell come back down and get to support. I think so many people think sell the strong one because maybe the major market isn't performing as well, and they look for that and then you just get run over. It's one of those things I've done so many times and it's burned me that I go, look at when the leader is going up, you want to get in at any chance that you can on a dip, buy the dip. And I also want to be able to try and trail and hold longs for as long as I possibly can in the market that has been leading versus fading it. So just to me, it's just a simple philosophy, really, and it's just a way of thinking that over the years has really helped me. Stay long with the one that's the strongest, and this is why I like having the correlations and looking at this, and the ones that aren't leading, maybe they're two-way trades, maybe they're smaller trades. Once again, it's really more of a mindset, not telling you what to think, more about how I think. And I think right now, from what I'm seeing in the Russell, my process will continue to tell me to be looking to buy dips in that until it doesn't work. Remember, everything works until it doesn't. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them down below. You could also follow me on Twitter at Anthony Crudele. Don't forget to check out Instagram, Anthony C. Crudele. That's a wrap for today. See you next week.